The year was 2178, and humanity had reached a new pinnacle in space exploration. Earth's space stations orbited in a synchronized dance around the planet, acting as the eyes and ears of humanity in the vastness of space. Among these stations, the Atlas station was the most advanced, equipped with the latest technology to monitor distant galaxies and beyond. On a quiet day aboard Atlas station, the crew was engaged in their routine tasks. Captain Sarah Alvarez, a seasoned space veteran, stood at the helm, her sharp eyes scanning the data on her console. Everything seemed normal until it wasn't. A sudden loud beep broke the silence. The crew's attention snapped to the source of the noise, a small screen flashing red. It was an alien distress signal, unlike anything they had ever seen before. The signal was faint, almost drowned out by the cosmic background noise, but it was there, persistent and urgent. "Captain, we're picking up a distress signal," said Lieutenant Marcus Lee, the station's communication officer. His fingers flew over the controls, trying to stabilize the weak signal. "It's coming from an unknown region of space, far beyond our usual monitoring range." Sarah frowned, her mind racing. "Can you identify the source? Any idea who sent it?" Marcus shook his head. "The signal is heavily encrypted, and it's using a frequency we've never encountered before. But one thing's for sure. It's an alien fleet, and they're in serious trouble." The word alien sent a ripple of unease through the crew. While humanity had encountered other species before, the vastness of the universe meant that new, unknown civilizations could appear at any moment. The fact that this fleet was reaching out for help suggested they were in a dire situation. "Let's get a team on this immediately," Sarah ordered. "We need to decode that signal and find out exactly what we're dealing with." The crew sprang into action, the calm routine of the day now replaced by the urgency of the situation. Engineers and scientists gathered around Marcus's station, pooling their knowledge and expertise. They worked tirelessly, running simulations, analyzing the data, and slowly but surely, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. After what felt like hours, Marcus finally cracked the encryption. "Got it," he exclaimed, his voice tinged with excitement and relief. "The signal is from a fleet of ships stranded in the Epsilon Nebula, a region known for its treacherous gravitational anomalies and unpredictable space weather. The Epsilon Nebula was notorious among spacefarers. Its swirling clouds of gas and energy made it a hazardous zone, even for the most advanced ships. If an entire fleet was stranded there, it meant they were in grave danger." "They're running out of resources," Marcus continued, reading the translated message. "Their life support systems are failing, and they've sustained heavy damage from the nebula's storms. They're asking for immediate assistance." Sarah's mind was already racing ahead, thinking of the implications. "This is no ordinary distress call," she said. "If they're reaching out to us, it means they believe we can help them. We need to contact Earth and get approval for a rescue mission." Without hesitation, Sarah opened a secure communication line to Earth's Space Command. She briefed them on the situation, emphasizing the urgency of the mission. Within minutes, the response came back, a go-ahead for the rescue operation. Earth had always prided itself on its humanitarian efforts, even extending that ethos to the stars. The idea of leaving a stranded fleet to perish in the depths of space was unthinkable. Sarah turned to her crew, her expression determined. "We've been given the green light. Prepare the fleet for departure. This isn't just about saving lives. It's about showing the galaxy what humanity stands for." The crew nodded in agreement, their faces set with resolve. They knew the mission would be dangerous, but they were ready. This was their chance to prove that humanity was a force for good in the universe, capable of overcoming even the most daunting challenges. As the Atlas station buzzed with activity, ships were prepped and supplies were loaded. The rescue fleet would be small, but equipped with the best technology Earth had to offer. Engineers double-checked every system, knowing that even a small error could mean disaster in the treacherous environment of the Epsilon Nebula. Before long, the fleet was ready. Sarah took one last look at the station, then boarded the lead ship, the Endeavor. The journey ahead would be fraught with peril, but she was confident in her crew's abilities. They had trained for moments like this, and now it was time to put that training to the test. As the ships departed, leaving Atlas Station behind, the crew couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. The fate of an entire alien fleet was in their hands, and the outcome of this mission could have far-reaching consequences for humanity's place in the galaxy. But for now, there was only one focus: reaching the stranded fleet in time. The signal had been received, and humanity had answered the call. The Endeavor and its fleet sped through the dark expanse of space, their engines humming with power as they navigated the treacherous path toward the Epsilon Nebula. Inside the ship, Captain Sarah Alvarez sat in the command chair, her eyes focused on the stars ahead. The weight of the mission pressed on her shoulders, but she knew there was no turning back now. The Epsilon Nebula was a swirling mass of gas and energy, its bright colors contrasting sharply with the dark void around it. As the fleet approached, the turbulence from the nebula began to affect the ships, making them shake slightly. But the crew was prepared. They had trained for situations like this, and their nerves were steeled for the challenge. "Captain, we're nearing the edge of the nebula," reported Lieutenant Marcus Lee from his station. "The gravitational anomalies are getting stronger, but our shields are holding." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "Good. Keep monitoring the systems closely. We can't afford any mistakes." The crew worked in silence, each member fully aware of the dangers ahead. The Epsilon Nebula was notorious for swallowing ships whole, its chaotic gravitational forces capable of tearing even the most advanced vessels apart. But the humans had one advantage: their determination. As the Endeavor entered the outer edges of the nebula, the turbulence increased, and the ship's hull groaned under the pressure. But it held firm, cutting through the swirling gases like a blade through water. "Captain, I'm picking up the alien fleet on our scanners," Marcus said, breaking the tense silence. "They're deep inside the nebula, just as the distress signal indicated. I'm also detecting significant damage to their ships. Several of them have lost power entirely." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The situation was even more dire than they had anticipated. "Can we establish contact with them?" Marcus tapped a few keys, trying to lock onto the alien ship's communication frequencies. After a few moments, he shook his head. "The nebula's interference is making it difficult, but I'll keep trying." "We might need to get closer." Sarah clenched her jaw. Moving deeper into the nebula was risky, but they had no other choice. "Helm, take us in closer. We need to make contact with them as soon as possible." The Endeavor pushed forward, the gravitational forces around it growing stronger with each passing moment. The view outside the ship's windows was a mesmerizing display of colors and light, but the crew had no time to admire the scenery. Their focus was on the task at hand, reaching the stranded fleet and offering their assistance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus's console beeped. "Captain, I've established a weak communication link with the alien fleet. It's not perfect, but it's the best we can manage under these conditions." Sarah took a deep breath and activated the communication system. "This is Captain Sarah Alvarez of the Earthship Endeavor. We have received your distress signal and are here to assist. Please respond." For a few moments, there was only static, the signal distorted by the nebula's interference. But then, a voice crackled through the speakers, faint but clear enough to understand. "This is Commander Thal of the Carillion Fleet," the voice said, sounding both relieved and desperate. "We are grateful for your assistance. Our ships are severely damaged and we have many injured. We don't have much time left. Our life support systems are failing." Sarah's heart went out to the commander and his crew. She could only imagine the fear and despair they must have been feeling, stranded in such a hostile environment with no way out. "Commander Thal, we are moving in to assist you. We'll do everything we can to get you and your fleet to safety." "Thank you, Captain," Commander Thal replied, his voice thick with emotion. "We didn't know if anyone would come to help us. Your presence here is a beacon of hope." As the communication link wavered, Sarah turned to her crew. "Prepare the rescue teams. We'll need to send out repair crews to stabilize their ships and medical teams to assist the injured." "We don't have much time." The Endeavor's crew sprang into action, gathering the necessary equipment and supplies. Engineers suited up in their protective gear, ready to brave the harsh conditions outside the ship. Medical personnel prepared to treat the alien crew members, unsure of what challenges they might face in dealing with an unfamiliar species. "Captain, we'll need to dock with their ships to transfer supplies and personnel," Marcus said, checking the readings on his console. "But the nebula's interference is making it difficult to maneuver." "It's going to be a tight fit," Sarah nodded. "We'll have to do our best. Our priority is getting them out of here safely." The fleet moved in closer to the Corellian ships, the human pilots displaying their exceptional skills as they navigated through the dangerous environment. The alien ships were in worse shape than they had feared. Several were listing to one side, their hulls scarred and battered by the nebula's storms. With careful precision, the Endeavour docked with the largest of the Corellian ships, the Hadar. As the airlocks connected, a loud clang echoed through the ship, signaling the successful link. The crew wasted no time, rushing to the docking bay to begin the rescue operation. Sarah led the way, her expression determined. The doors slid open, revealing a group of Corellians waiting on the other side. They were humanoid in appearance, but with deep blue skin and large, expressive eyes. Despite their injuries and exhaustion, they stood tall, their gratitude evident in their expressions. "Welcome aboard the Endeavour," Sarah said, extending her hand to the Corellian leader. "We're here to help." Commander Thal stepped forward, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "We are forever in your debt, Captain. Your bravery and kindness will not be forgotten." Sarah smiled, though her mind was already focused on the next steps. There was still much work to be done, and time was running out. "Let's get started. We'll do everything we can to get you and your people to safety." As the rescue teams began their work, the two species, human and Corellian, worked side by side, united in their shared goal of survival. Despite the challenges ahead, they knew that together, they could overcome the odds and make it out of the nebula alive. With the initial contact made and the alien fleet secured, the real challenge lay ahead. Captain Sarah Alvarez knew that getting the Corellian ships out of the Epsilon Nebula was going to be the toughest part of the mission. The nebula's unpredictable gravitational forces and volatile space storms posed a significant threat, and the alien ships were in no condition to endure more damage. Standing on the bridge of the Endeavour, Sarah reviewed the mission plans with her senior officers. The holographic display in front of them showed the current positions of the human and Corellian ships, along with the safest possible route through the nebula. But even the safe route was far from easy. "We'll need to escort the Corellian fleet out, one ship at a time," said Lieutenant Marcus Lee, pointing to the display. "Their propulsion systems are barely functioning, and any sudden movement could cause further damage. We'll have to tether them to our ships and guide them manually." Sarah nodded, her gaze focused on the path ahead. "Understood. We'll need to move quickly but carefully. The longer we stay here, the greater the risk of a storm hitting us. Let's start with the largest ship, the Hadar. If we can get that one out safely, the others should be easier." The crew was already prepared, with engineers and pilots ready to execute the plan. The Endeavour and two other human ships, the Vanguard and the Aurora, would each take responsibility for towing one of the Corellian ships. It was a delicate operation, requiring precision and coordination. As Sarah gave the order to begin, the Endeavour moved into position alongside the Hadar. The Corellian ship was in bad shape. Its hull was scorched, and parts of it were barely holding together. The docking clamps extended from the Endeavour, securing themselves to the Hadar with a loud metallic clank. "Clamps are secure, Captain," reported Chief Engineer Ellen Moore. "We're ready to begin the tow." Sarah took a deep breath. "Proceed, but take it slow. We can't afford any mistakes." The Endeavour's engines engaged, pulling the Hadar forward. The ship groaned under the strain, but the clamps held firm. The two ships began their slow journey through the nebula, with the Vanguard and the Aurora following closely behind, each towing another Corellian vessel. Inside the Hadar, the Corellian crew watched anxiously as their ship was guided through the nebula. Commander Thal stood beside Sarah on the Endeavour's bridge, his face tense. "Your technology is impressive, Captain," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "We've never seen ships move through the nebula with such precision." Sarah managed a small smile. As the fleet made its way deeper into the nebula, the gravitational anomalies grew stronger, causing the ships to lurch and sway. The crew of the Endeavour worked tirelessly, adjusting the ship's course and stabilizing the Corellian vessels. Every move had to be calculated, every decision made with care. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the Endeavour. "Captain, we're detecting a massive energy spike ahead," Marcus called out, his hands flying over the controls. "It's a storm, and it's heading straight for us." Sarah's heart raced. A storm in the nebula was the last thing they needed. The violent energy surges could tear the ships apart if they weren't careful. "All ships prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered. "We need to find cover. Now!" The human and Corellian ships struggled against the gravitational pull of the storm. Sarah scanned the surrounding area, looking for a way to protect the fleet. "There," she said, pointing to a large cluster of asteroids ahead. "If we can get behind those asteroids, they might shield us from the worst of the storm." The fleet changed course, heading for the asteroid field. The storm was closing in fast, its energy waves already causing turbulence. The ships shook violently, and the crew braced themselves against the impact. The Endeavour reached the asteroids just in time, maneuvering into position behind one of the larger rocks. The Vanguard and the Aurora followed suit, dragging the Corellian ships to safety. The storm hit moments later, slamming into the asteroids with a force that shook the entire fleet. For a few tense moments, it seemed as if the asteroids wouldn't hold. But they did. The storm raged around them, but the ships remained safe behind their rocky shield. Inside the Endeavour, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. "That was too close," Sarah muttered, wiping the sweat from her brow. "But we made it." Commander Thal, who had been gripping the console tightly, slowly relaxed. "Your quick thinking saved us, Captain. I don't know how we can ever repay you." Sarah shook her head. "There's no need for repayment, Commander. We're all in this together. Let's just focus on getting out of here alive." As the storm began to pass, the fleet emerged from behind the asteroids and continued their journey. The worst of the nebula was behind them, but the mission was far from over. There were still more Corellian ships to rescue, and the path ahead was fraught with challenges. But Sarah and her crew were undeterred. They had come this far, and they weren't about to give up now. The mission had truly begun, and there was no turning back. The fleet pressed on, their resolve stronger than ever. The human and Corellian crews worked together, their shared goal of survival bringing them closer. Despite the dangers that lay ahead, they knew that as long as they stayed united, they had a chance. And so, with the nebula still swirling around them, the mission continued, a testament to the strength and determination of both humans and aliens alike. The successful rescue of the Corellian fleet had given the human crew a brief moment of relief, but it was short-lived. The Endeavour and the rest of the human ships were now surrounded by the dangers of the Epsilon Nebula. The area was highly unstable, with energy storms brewing, and the gravitational anomalies were becoming increasingly erratic. The nebula seemed to be reacting to the presence of the fleet, and it was only a matter of time before things took a turn for the worse. Captain Sarah Alvarez stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the swirling clouds of energy outside. The Corellian ships were safe for now, but their engines were still offline and they were heavily reliant on the human fleet for protection. The situation was growing more desperate by the minute. "We've bought ourselves some time," Sarah said, turning to her crew, "but we need to find a way out of here before the nebula becomes too unstable. The Corellian ships won't survive another round of storms." Lieutenant Marcus Lee nodded, his face tense. "Our sensors are picking up increased activity in the surrounding area. The energy levels are spiking, and it's causing major distortions in the gravitational field. We need to move fast." Sarah's mind raced as she considered their options. The nebula was a labyrinth of shifting energies and gravitational forces. Navigating out of it was going to be a monumental challenge, especially with the damaged Corellian fleet in tow. "Can we get their engines back online?" Sarah asked, looking over at Chief Engineer Ellen Moore. Ellen shook her head. "Not in time. Their ships took too much damage. We're looking at hours, maybe even days of repairs, and we don't have that kind of time." A heavy silence fell over the bridge as the crew realized the gravity of their situation. The human ships were sturdy and well-equipped, but they weren't designed to tow an entire fleet through one of the most dangerous regions of space. And the longer they stayed, the more likely it was that the nebula would claim them all. "We need to come up with a plan," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "We can't stay here, but we can't just leave them behind either." "Maybe we don't have to tow them all at once," Marcus suggested. "If we can find a stable path out of the nebula, we could make multiple trips, taking 1 or 2 ships at a time." Ellen considered the idea. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot. We'd need to find a way to mark the safe route and make sure the storms don't cut us off halfway through." Sarah nodded. "Agreed. Start working on that. In the meantime, we'll need to keep the Corellian ships as stable as possible. Divert power to our shields and set up a perimeter. We'll protect them from any incoming storms as best we can." The crew sprang into action, each person focused on their task. The human ships formed a defensive ring around the Corellian fleet, their shields extending to cover the damaged vessels. The engineers worked on finding a way to map the safest route out of the nebula, using every piece of data they could gather from their sensors. But the nebula wasn't going to make it easy for them. Just as they started to see some progress, the entire area was hit by a massive energy surge. The storm outside intensified, and the gravitational forces began to warp and twist space around the fleet. "Captain, we've got a problem," Marcus called out, his voice filled with urgency. "The storm's growing stronger, and it's causing massive fluctuations in the gravitational field. We're being pulled towards the center of the nebula." Sarah's heart sank. "Reverse engines! Full power! We need to hold our position." The Endeavor's engines roared to life, straining against the pull of the nebula's core. The other human ships did the same, their thrusters burning bright as they fought to keep the fleet from being dragged into the heart of the storm. But the nebula was relentless. The gravitational forces continued to increase, and the strain on the ships was becoming unbearable. The Endeavor's hull groaned under the pressure, and warning lights flashed across the control panels. "We can't hold on much longer," Ellen shouted over the noise. "The engines are overheating, and the stress on the hull is reaching critical levels." Sarah clenched her fists, desperately trying to think of a solution. They couldn't hold their position, and moving forward seemed impossible. But retreating wasn't an option either, not if they wanted to save the Corellian fleet. "Marcus, what's the status of the storm?" Sarah asked, her mind racing for a way out. Marcus quickly checked the readings. "It's still building, but there's a brief lull coming up in about 3 minutes. If we're going to move, that's our chance." Sarah made a snap decision. "All ships prepare to move on my mark. We're going to ride the lull and push through to the edge of the nebula. Ellen, I need everything you've got. Shields, engines, whatever it takes." "Aye, Captain," Ellen replied, already working to redirect power to the necessary systems. The minutes ticked by like hours as the crew braced themselves for the maneuver. The ship's engines hummed with barely contained power, and the tension on the bridge was palpable. "Steady," Sarah murmured, her eyes locked on the display showing the approaching lull. Finally, the storm began to weaken, just as Marcus had predicted. The gravitational forces lessened, and the energy surges subsided for a brief moment. "Now! Full power ahead!" Sarah commanded. The Endeavor surged forward, leading the fleet through the eye of the storm. The human ships strained against the turbulence, but they pushed through with sheer determination. The Corellian ships followed closely behind, their damaged hulls groaning as they were dragged through the chaotic space. For a moment it seemed as though they might make it. The edge of the nebula was in sight, and the gravitational forces were weakening. But then, just as they were about to break free, a massive energy wave erupted from the heart of the nebula, slamming into the fleet with terrifying force. The ships were thrown into disarray, their systems overloaded by the sudden shock. The Endeavor was tossed like a rag doll, its crew struggling to regain control. "Hold on!" Sarah shouted, gripping the edge of her console as the ship was buffeted by the wave. The Endeavor shuddered violently, but it held together. Slowly, the wave passed, leaving the fleet battered but intact. The human ships had managed to shield the Corellian vessels from the worst of the damage, but it had taken a toll on everyone. "Damage report!" Sarah ordered, her voice hoarse from the strain. Ellen quickly assessed the situation. "We've taken some heavy hits, but we're still operational. The Carillion ships are holding. The stars gleamed like distant diamonds against the blackness of space as the Endeavor floated in the relative calm of the galactic void. The battered Carillion fleet, now safely away from the dangers of the Epsilon Nebula, was slowly regaining its composure. The damage was extensive, but the most critical repairs had been completed. The Carillion ships, though scarred, were now on the mend. Captain Sarah Alvarez stood on the bridge, observing the Carillion vessels through the viewport. The once crumbling fleet now appeared resilient, a testament to the combined efforts of both human and Carillion crews. Sarah's mind was still reeling from the harrowing events they had just endured, but she was determined to ensure that their efforts would result in something more than mere survival. "Captain," Lieutenant Marcus Lee said, approaching with a datapad, "we've received a transmission from the Carillion Command. They want to hold a meeting to discuss their gratitude and the future of our alliance." Sarah nodded, her face reflecting a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. "Prepare the conference room. I want all senior officers present. This is a significant moment for both our species." In the conference room, representatives from the Carillion fleet, including their leader, Admiral Vorak, gathered alongside the senior officers of the Endeavor. The atmosphere was charged with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. Admiral Vorak, a tall and imposing figure with a regal bearing, stood at the head of the table. His scales shimmered faintly under the artificial lights, and his eyes, though tired, held a deep respect. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Captain Alvarez," Vorak began, his voice resonant and deep, "on behalf of the Carillion people, I wish to extend our heartfelt thanks for your bravery and your unwavering support. Without your intervention, our fleet would have perished." Sarah inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Admiral Vorak, it was an honor to assist. We saw the Carillion fleet not as strangers, but as allies in need. Our cooperation has shown that we are stronger together." The room fell silent as Vorak paused, his gaze sweeping across the gathered assembly. "The Carillion Council has been in discussions about our future relations with the humans. We have witnessed your commitment and your courage firsthand. It is clear that a new chapter in our history is beginning." Admiral Vorak then turned to face Sarah directly. "We propose a formal alliance between our peoples. It would encompass mutual defense, joint research projects, and cultural exchanges. We believe that by working together, we can achieve great things and ensure our continued survival in this vast and dangerous galaxy." Sarah's heart raced with excitement. This was a significant step forward, not just for the immediate survival of their people, but for the long-term future of interstellar cooperation. "A formal alliance sounds like a step in the right direction," Sarah replied, her voice filled with determination. "However, we must also address the challenges and concerns of both sides. Open communication and shared goals will be crucial." Vorak nodded in agreement. "Indeed. To that end, we would like to propose a joint committee to oversee the implementation of the alliance. This committee would consist of representatives from both our fleets and would focus on areas such as defense strategies, technological advancements, and diplomatic relations." Sarah turned to her own officers, who were nodding in agreement. "We accept your proposal. We'll need to establish our own representatives for the committee and outline the specifics of our cooperation." As the discussions continued, the atmosphere in the room shifted from formal negotiations to a genuine exchange of ideas and aspirations. The Carillion and human representatives shared stories of their respective cultures, their hopes for the future, and their visions for a united galaxy. Throughout the meeting, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. The trials and tribulations of the rescue operation had forged a bond between their species, one that was built on mutual respect and shared goals. The alliance was more than just a diplomatic agreement. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when different peoples came together in times of need. As the meeting drew to a close, Admiral Vorak extended a hand to Sarah. "Captain, this is only the beginning. We have much work ahead of us, but I believe that our collaboration will lead to great achievements." Sarah shook his hand firmly, a smile on her face. "Admiral Vorak, I couldn't agree more. Here's to a future of cooperation and prosperity for both our peoples." The representatives of both fleets exchanged smiles and nods of agreement. The formalities were settled, but the real work was just beginning. The alliance would need to be nurtured and developed, and there would undoubtedly be challenges along the way. But for now, there was a sense of hope and optimism in the air. As the Corellian representatives departed and the human officers returned to their duties, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The future was uncertain, but the foundation of a new alliance had been laid. The trials they had faced together had proven that they were capable of overcoming even the most daunting obstacles. The Endeavor resumed its patrol in the galaxy, now accompanied by the Corellian fleet. The stars stretched out before them, a vast and uncharted expanse waiting to be explored. Sarah knew that the journey ahead would be filled with both opportunities and challenges, but with their new alliance, she was confident that they could face whatever lay ahead. Together, the humans and Corellian had forged a new path in the galaxy. It was a path of cooperation, understanding, and mutual respect. And as the ships sailed into the unknown, they did so with the knowledge that they were no longer alone in their quest for a brighter future.